Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Harry Gross. Welcome.
Hello.
Harry is
Thank you.
a well-known figure in some circumstances.
In some circles.
Some circumstances. Well, all right. So you're teaching at Mercer. You're trying to keep the students straight. And
Doing my best.
That's great. So we have coming from different, aliquots of people. I'm an old guy, conservative. Harry is a young, I won't use the word progressive, but you have the views that are out there. Okay, and one of the things going on right now is in the country, there's been a lot of, I could call it a flare-up of anti-Semitism. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but it would mean that there are great families of mankind, and Semitic family are the people that are, they're Jewish, but they're also Arabs. So they're Palestinians, they're just other people that live in Iraq, the people that live in Egypt, and they speak a similar kind of language. So there may even be one mother language for the whole gang of different people. So if you say you're anti-Semitic, it also means you're anti-Palestinian. But I'll let that fine point
to some degree
go. But maybe discuss a little bit the Jewish American community and some of what's going on. And obviously, a lot of the tension that's arisen recently is ruffled of what's going on in the Gaza Strip, the issues about the wars that the Israelis have fought and their actions, which they would say would be in self-defense. And we'll discuss that. Is there any limit to self-defense, so to speak? Is there any kind of bridge that's too far? But that's out there. And the history of the Jewish community, I mean, I won't get too much into it, but certainly when the temple was destroyed by the Roman army, and I think it was in the 60s AD. You may know the precise.
70. It was 70 AD.
Did I miss that, Harry?
70. Well, the first Jewish war begins in 67.
66.
So
66 would be the number I have. 66 is when the things took place. Well, in any event, that was a big, huge event, and so the Jewish community spread. It's a really short story about it. They went everywhere. And they generally were the out group. So they were the out group for 2,000 years. They had different periods of good treatment and many terrible bad things happened to them. Many bad things. And the idea was, well, can we ever have? We face people being against us, people hurting us physically, morally, doing all kinds. It's just been a very uncomfortable 2,000 years. And is there an argument to getting back to where we came from 2,000 years ago? And so the different kind of figures arose. There was an immigration back to Israel. And this was in the middle of all this. There was the Holocaust, all the terrible things that happened. The Jewish national state was established. And they fought a lot of wars. They have their viewpoints about what they need to do to survive, as they say, in a very tough neighborhood. And the events with the genocide that happened, 1,000 people killed, or 2,000, or 1,200 maybe. All kinds of these terrible atrocities that took place. And then so we have this response, which is an understandable response. And then from that, we've gotten into different situations where the solution for many of the problems the Israeli nation faces might be an armed response, and I think that's a fair statement. And having said that, that doesn't mean that everyone supports this policy. So in any event, we're into this complicated relationship, and then one of the things that I think that's going on that's motivated anti-Semitism is, with that backdrop, is the Israeli community, the Jewish community in the U.S. They came over. They're from escaping acts of violence, particularly in the Russian Pale, places they were forced into, the difficulties they faced. They came to the U.S. and they faced discrimination. I think that's fair to say, right across the line. They made a wonderful contribution to the country. They did all kinds of things that were creative and good. They were really, I think it's fair to say, not altogether, but a major player in the civil rights revolution, if you want to say that. They wanted moral behavior in the U.S. And in the middle of all that, a lot of what we would call classic anti-Semitism diminished. And there were still acts, but it was much less, and it's too long of a story to get into that. But with the actions in the Middle East, there are many Palestinian refugees or people from different Arab countries live in the U.S. now. They took tremendous offense against the actions there. It's more complicated than that. And they sort of said, well, if I'm going to do something against a Jewish person because they're helping the arrangements in the Middle East, or they're doing all these bad things in the Gaza Strip, but really the Jewish community is not everyone shares that opinion. In fact, almost everyone would not want to hurt anybody. I mean, I think that's a fair statement. That maybe if somebody wants to kill them, they might say, okay, an eye for an eye. But we have this complicated situation now, and I would have to say that the foreign policy the events in the Middle East and the U.S. connection with those events have really stimulated a lot of anti-Semitism, and I've sort of made a long little epistle on that. Now, Harry, what are your views on that? And have you, you're on the ground, so to speak. Have you detected any anti-Semitism locally in the university setting after the events in the Middle East, which in other places has happened?
That's a lot of questions. I mean, I think to the latter, no. I have not detected any actual anti-Semitism. Criticisms of Israel, yes. Criticisms of the Israeli state, yes. But hatred of Jews, blaming Jewish people directly as an entirety for that, no. There has been a lot of anti-Semitism, but even prior to the events of October 7th and the resulting conflict in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, there has been a lot of anti-Semitism. Temple Beth Israel was marched on by a neo-Nazi group in 2023. And then Rabbi Behar was targeted for a stalking campaign by a similar group the next year. In 2018, we had the deadliest shooting or deadliest attack on a Jewish community in American history, with the Tree of Life Synagogue being attacked by a white supremacist. The rise of right-wing extremism in this country has been kind of correlated with a rise in anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is fairly baked into a lot of American and European culture. Anti-Semitism itself, what we kind of think of anti-Semitism kind of stereotypically, is an old system. I mean, it goes back to the Middle Ages across the board, and it's heavily rooted in Christian competition with Jewish communities in Europe. And there is anti-Semitism in the non-Christian world, but it's a different form of anti-Semitism. You don't see the same level of organized persecutions of Jewish communities outside of a few kind of rare exceptions than you do in Europe. So anti-Semitism is at the core of Western civilization at this point.
Well, I mean, that's quite a thing to say. I mean, it's certainly from the historical point of view. If you look at the way the European nation states arose, a lot of it was how can we stabilize this with this barbarian group of people that have come in? And so the deal is we're going to have a Christian nation, so to speak, and the Catholic Church would basically anoint kings, and they would be as surrogate, sort of the idea of the Pope. His ear is close to God's, and the church is going to support the arising monarchies, and with good reason. They're going to make things safer. We don't all the warfare between dukes and counts and whatever and upheavals will be diminished with a sort of a stable unitary kind of government. And this is a predominantly rural arrangement, and the Jewish, I could call them travelers, that are just trying to find.
Well, travelers are a different group.
I know that. I said I would call them that.
But the travelers are Romani.
I know that. It's a word that's used particularly in England for gypsies. I mean,
yes.
That's a word, but it's not a bad word for people that are sort of on the road a lot. They're moving back and forth. They're trying to find a place to live happily and successfully. And they're an outgroup, a tremendous outgroup, in this kind of unitary arrangement that was put together, maybe the most prominent outgroup. And the other point about this was in a situation where the preponderance of people were living in some feudal state, or certainly in rural areas, agricultural areas. The Jewish people were excluded from a lot of this, but they became urban men par excellence. I mean, they really lived in urban places, and they became associated with all the resentment that took place about urban situations, and also money laundering, which they did. Somebody needed to do it, and so the Catholic Church was against that. And also, the issue was brought up a lot about some of the scripture about the Jews were cast as bad people in some of the New Testament books. So all of that played itself out. So episodically, stuff happened. It was, I believe, they were better treated in Islamic places.
Yes.
And I think one big example would be in Spain when they were the Catholic monarchy that prevailed in this extraordinary 500-year war to reclaim the peninsula, and they finally drove all of the Islamic, I guess, nation, if you want to say that, back to North Africa. And the people that were left there, everybody had to convert to Catholicism, and many people pretended to do it. But so there was they had all kinds of terrible things that happened if you didn't leave. Well, a huge number of people left, and particularly went to Turkish world, where they were well regarded, and was often the case. They were not. It was not a totally equal situation. And if you read the Koran, there's a lot of tremendous stories about how bad Jewish people are. Really, in the book of the cow, maybe I quoted that. It's
well,
like
I would remind you that the Quran is revealed piecemeal, and it's not. It's revealed in the sense that it is every surah. Refers to a current situation faced by the Ummah.
Well, of course.
So it doesn't hold the same weight as, say, like the book of Genesis.
Well, I'm not
as
sure how I would parse that out. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean,
but to your point,
it's very powerful stuff. Also against Christians, very powerful stuff. And you could, if you wanted to, say, I'm quoting Leviticus about anything here. Well, you know, the opinion. This is what the people say about, I don't know, gender confusion, if you want to say it that way, in Leviticus, and there the Bible says this. Well, if somebody in the Islamic world wanted to make the case that this is a bad people, there's that card in the deck.
There's the card, and it was periodically used and has been periodically used. There have been great purges and forced conversions through the Ottoman Empire and Persia, in Muslim India. I mean, that's been a card in the deck, but for the most part, the Quranic tradition, the tradition of the Hadith, is that Christians and Jews are to be considered as dhimmi, as people of the book, as members of the shared faith, tradition, and community, and to be given autonomy.
Well, that is, I think that is often what happened, and indeed the way that the Islamic world functioned was kind of a theocratic arrangement. So it wasn't the same situation that we had in the Western world, where democracy the will of the people often surfaces in a bad way. But it's a different situation, and certainly for generations, the situation was, I would say, better for if you were a Jewish person in the Islamic world, then you might be fighting your way through Europe. Although we have to, the other things that happened, particularly the French Revolution. So all kinds of there are many situations where the Jewish people found some footing. France is one of them, and also in England after
Cromwell.
Cromwell brought the Jewish people back, and they were more or less forced out of the country for several hundred
by
years.
Edward III in 1291.
So several hundred years, and then you could say Cromwell maybe lets them back in
1657.
1648.
1657.
You think it's that?
It's 1657.
He left in 58, didn't he? When did he die?
I think it's
Very close to
1958.
his
It's very
death.
close to his death, but he lets them back in
I don't know,
1657.
Almost like, well, all right, I won't quibble. As you notice, we have the tendency to quibble over these things.
We
So
do,
better
but-
not to. But in any event, the takeaway message was that the Jewish people were not uniformly condemned to bad situations, but there was always that fear of it. And certainly in the East, in the Russian Pale, periodically all these terrible things.
Part of the problem is that we're speaking of Jewish people as a monolith, but there are, particularly by the medieval period, five distinct cultures of Jewish people. You have the Sephardim in Spain and southern Italy. You have the Ashkenazi in northern Europe. You have the Beta Israel or Ethiopian Jews. You have the Romanian in the Byzantine Empire. And then you have the Mizrahi of the Muslim world.
Ethiopian people, I don't know, whatever group they're in.
Yeah, so
So I don't know.
Ethiopia is
So
Beta Israel. They claim to have the
other
largest.
point was, I mean, not to overkill this, but so I think you wisely say there's a Jewish community almost everywhere, always as an outgroup, and there may be situations where they were a little better off, a little worse off.
Yeah.
But it would be unusual to say that it was an optimal arrangement. And so one of the things that happened is in the at least I mentioned France and the revolution and how well that worked out, and you could say always in the back of the mind was there's something bad can happen, and then the Nazis came, and indeed I would say the whole deal with the French Revolution was treating everyone the same. No more out-group. You're just a French citizen. Nobody's in an out-group anymore. And then when the Nazis arrived, they really, the most liberal, you could make the case, one of the most liberal egalitarian nations in the world. It's in their little slogan, their slogan, égalité, liberté, whatever. Fraternité, although they changed that somewhat, but I'll let it go with that. In any event, so all these bad things happen.
Well, you've glossed over an important historical marker at this point,
Yes.
that there is a deep association between Judaism in Europe, particularly Ashkenazic Judaism, and revolutionary movements in Europe. Because there was such a long history of persecution for Jewish identity, many Jews throughout European history have resonated with messages that sought to provide equality or to provide, whether through equal citizenry or through equality of condition. And many Jews, particularly aftermath of the Great Pogrom of 1881 to 1883 in the Russian Empire, turned to socialism as an archetype. There has been a long association of Judaism and socialism since inception. Moses Hess, a prominent early Zionist, was Karl Marx's mentor. Marx himself was Jewish by ethnicity. And so what that leads to, let me finish. Let me finish. What this leads to is an association to something called Judeo-Bolshevism. And Jews are seen as being blamed for communism. And every communist was a Jew, and every Jew was a communist. And one of the things that the Nazis really latched onto, and where they actually got most of their foothold in, was not in the racial superiority side of their message, that Jews were subhuman, that they were a different race. It was the connection of Jews with communism. Rosa Luxemburg, the leader of the Spartacus League, that had tried to overthrow the Weimar government in 1918 before she was murdered by Freikorps, was a prominent Jew. And there's this association that any Jew, particularly in Germany, was a secret communist. And if you were against communism, then you could be against Jewish people. And every Jew was suspect. And so anti-Semitism and anti-communism get kind of blended together in this horrific cycle during the interwar period that spreads to the United States, it spreads across Europe, and we still see some of its rhetoric today, where you have, for example, George Soros is a prominent kind of liberal financier, and because he's Jewish, there is a long tradition of this trope of saying that if George Soros is throwing money at someone, right, there is Soros-backed candidate. That's a long line of anti-Semitic tropes of Jewish financing and left-wing Jewish interference in elections.
Well, good. I let you talk. That's good. So always good to hear your opinions. So the takeaway message is, number one, is what our present circumstances, and then some of the socioeconomic events that happen. And so one of the issues, if you're the out group, that gives you some insights that people in the group don't possess. So one of them is the people in the group have to sort of stay in the groove. I think one example might be the amount of time the British aristocrats spend on their, I don't know, whatever their table manners. So in any event, I think if you're an outrider, you can look at the world in different ways, and you also have energy in different ways, and particularly because they're in urban circumstances. I think a lot of that lends itself to understanding some of the disjunctions in society, some of the defects that happen in human treatment, and the idea of repairing the world, I think, is certainly there. And I want to make. I've suffered. I want the world to be better, and what can I do to make the world better? So messianic events take place, and also. One of the issues, too, is the education story. The idea that when you coming of age, the bar mitzvah, there's one for the females, too, but the idea is that your idea is you have to have some kind of ability to understand things and be able to read, and so it's a pretty steep bar. And I think it inculcates a desire to understand things more than possibly other groups. The other issue is, this is a debatable point about intellectual abilities of different subgroups. And so you could say the IQ, people with an IQ of over 160 or whatever, they may have come from some kind of a difficult environment for whatever reason, it may be the bad circumstances that people lived in. If you couldn't, it required intellectual abilities to survive. But in any event, I think it's fair. Would be something that's almost an anathema to many people, that there's any difference in any genetic group with their mentation. There's absolutely no difference in whatever it is, and I think that for many reasons, it could be an argument that very high IQs, particularly in Eastern Europeans, it's very substantial. And if you look at mathematicians, to pick that, you go through a particular group. So they had, in my opinion, substantial intellectual abilities, I would say that. And it plays itself out very well in a world where that counts more than your physical strength or your ability to, I don't know, ride in a rodeo, so to speak. So urban people with great intellectual abilities, they looked to, like Janus, to the right, look to the left. And the idea is, we can use these abilities to structure a better world, and we can participate and understand that and be almost missionaries for a better world. So that was one way things went. And another way would be, I'm going to do well in trade, and in fact, in capitalism. So you sort of mentioned the Nazi demonization of Jewish people, and it sort of went, I think, in two ways. Almost everybody that stood in their way of their ideal, either on the left or on the right, were sort of enemies. So very wealthy people. You could say, look at those wealthy, powerful people And that's, I think that's one of the issues that takes place in circumstances where people, number one, are on the out group. So if you're a powerful person in the out group, they imagine you're going to be manipulated or they're going to do something to you. So the Nazis would say, particularly Adolf Hitler's experience in Vienna, oh, look at the Jewish people are doing extremely well here, I'm not. And this is, it's a Germanic nation, something is wrong. And so that can be one of the springs of anti-Semitism, is the idea that many positions of power and influence are occupied by people of Jewish faith. And you mentioned Soros, that might be a classic example. But if the money that goes into different liberal causes for making the world better, often comes from people that have been quite successful in mercantile arrangements. And so, and there's sort of one of the issues is a resentment against the powerful and the strong, and in some way against capitalism. So one of the issues that's out there with anti-Semitism is, it's interesting to see this happen. The changes that have taken place with the upheavals in the Middle East. Traditionally, the Jewish people would be in the Democratic Party, traditionally, and they would say, even though they had a lot of money, many people did, not everybody, they were using the money to support liberal causes, and they were repairing the world, and and the Democratic Party was their natural home, but
well, it was their natural home because the right conservative politics has always been opposed to Jewish interference in politics. Conservative politics across Europe and North America. Because primarily, one, there's a long tradition of Christian dominance of the right wing, but also because there is this idea that Jews cannot be allowed into the elite of a society.
Well,
When the reason that Jews became mercantile, the reason that many Jews entered finance, is because during the Middle Ages, that was the only things they were allowed to do. It was seen to be dirty work. It was seen to be unchristian work. And so they were literally banned from doing any other work. They just happened to be, it's kind of one of these great accidents of history, in the right place at the right time to be a literate people because of their focus on literacy, to be able to read the Torah and the like, to be a literate people with multiple connections to diaspora communities across the world because of the Roman expulsion in 125, and to be able to manipulate the instruments of capital when the financial revolution of the 1400s really occurred. And that's where you see kind of Jewish takeoff into the finance industry and to global capital as we know it, because they had been put there through restrictive laws. And this did create a ton of resentment throughout Europe, particularly among Christian communities. And the conservative wings of these countries, of these kingdoms, never forgave them for it, ever.
Well, they manipulated them, though. So in other words, if you say, what's the conservative wing in, I don't know, let's see, Germany, a German princely state in 1500, well, the Jewish people have money, and so they were allied with the aristocratic.
They actually were not. They were not. They were seen, and in many cases, they were the private serfs of, we go to the medieval period, Jews were the private serfs of many rulers. So, for example, they were the direct subjects of the King of England. They were the direct subjects of the King of France. They were the direct subjects of the Holy Roman Emperor. And as such, were supposed to be under their protection. But that was seen as the nobility resented this because the monarch was getting their tax revenue directly, was benefiting from their skills directly. One of the reasons why there is such a large Jewish community in what is now modern Poland was because the Duke of the Grand Duchy of Poland invited a group of Jews to come to Poland and settle, to be his personal serfs, that he would protect them in exchange for their tax revenue. So the nobility resented that deeply.
I would say this. So one of the protectors turned out to be the aristocrats. If you want to
No, because remember, in medieval politics, under a feudal structure, you have the monarch and then you have the nobility, and they are constantly at odds with each other. Because each one's jockeying for power. The nobles want autonomy, the king wants central authority.
On the country. So you could say there's whatever an aristocrat was, and so it's a big thing to say.
Well, let's take your example of 15th century Germany. You have the Junkers that are the aristocratic class, And the Junkers did not like the Novo Riche burghers, who were what would become the middle class. Now, many of these burghers were Jews across the board, but there was a competition between the rural elites based out of their castles and their large-scale field operations to expand their territory, and the cities, which were ruled by these middle-class merchants and bankers. And they detested each other across the board. You have mass massacres of burgher folk throughout the Middle Ages. The German Peasants' War in the late 1300s, is fought in large part of kind of trying to resolve this balance across the board. It's really not until the modern period, the 1600s, the 1700s, that you see this tension between urban and rural, between aristocrat and city, begin to kind of resolve itself.
Well, okay, I mean, it's getting time to end our conversation today, but the takeaway message is, my comment was conservative. Mm-hmm. So you could say, if you say the ruling royal family actually befriended a Jewish community, and maybe one of the biggest examples would be the Rothschilds. The way that they, and so Hitler would say, look at the Jewish people have piled up with the ruling, you could call them conservatives, the very highest conservatives. And you could say, well, they were serfs, but there was a raison d'etre between them, the way they worked with each other, and so there was a resentment. So the way this conversation started, which is a complicated conversation, and the reason it's complicated is in each area, there are all kinds of jumping around. Humans are behaving the way they behave, and the takeaway message, the Jewish community had some special things that were bad against them, and there were some things that out of all of this, for whatever reason, they had substantial virtues, skills, talents, abilities, and power to some degree. And they were, that was a difficult situation for an outgroup to be in. And I'll finish by this, and we can talk some more. Outgroups always have this problem. And you could say, well, you're an outgroup, and you're a powerful outgroup, and I'm going to resent you and do whatever I can against you. And on the other hand, if you're a outgroup that's in a very sociologically inferior place, I'm not really threatened, but you're going to win the Nobel Prize. On the other hand, I will abuse you just because you're in the outgroup. So you have Afro-Americans that in some ways are getting a difficult situation. And you could say the Jewish American community is in a similar situation. Now, I don't know how much we've gotten into this, but the important thing, I think, is to understand some of these, just in general, some of these currents that are going on, and repair the relationships as much as can be done. And the difficulty is, in my opinion, is the fact that Israel is there. I mean, it's psychologically important, and I can understand that, et cetera, but it makes and some Jewish people think this, it makes it confuses what their mission in the world is, whatever that is. And so it would be, some people would say, well, it would be easier not to be involved with the wars in the Middle East and just focus on social justice. And it's a difficult situation to be in, and that's when we're in. All right, Harry. Well, I had the last word tonight, so thank you, and look forward to talking to you some more. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot.